Welcome, everyone. You are listening to the Two Real Cinema Club with me, Andres Lorente.
And me, James Rosiga. Every episode on the Two Real Cinema Club, we watch two movies. We watch a brand new movie, which you can go out and enjoy in cinemas right now. We compare it to an older movie, which is almost certainly better. This episode, it's cannons and muskets, and above all, it's tricorn hats.
Yeah.
This time we have watched the new Ridley Scott, maybe historical, maybe not historical blockbuster Napoleon. And we will be comparing it to Stanley Kubrick's 1975 masterpiece, Barry Lyndon. This is the third time we've done Kubrick on the pod, and we're only at episode 90.
This is like one in every 30 episodes is a
Kubrick film. That's not a bad average. I'll buy that.
I think when you break it down between popcorn counters, it comes down to probably one in every 15 episodes.
At least, I think, yeah.
What have we? So we did Dr. Strangelove.
Yeah. And then we did Full Metal Jacket.
Full Metal Jacket. Boy, it seems like ages ago. The thing that struck me about watching the Kubrick film is just what variety he has in his career, right? I mean, his career is bizarre because I think he made films for 44 years or something like that, and he only made something like 11 to 14 major productions. So
13, I think.
13.
That's the number I've got in my head.
But when I thought, he made Barry Lyndon a couple years after he did Space Odyssey, which is just bizarre to me. Isn't that kind of wild? And then Doctor Strangelove was a few years before that, which is a totally different film as well. It's just interesting. I think that it kind of worked to his advantage that he worked kind of slowly because he didn't make a bunch of the same film, year after year for a period of 10 years or something like that. It's really spread out, and he's got tremendous variety and versatility, I guess. That's what I realized this time.
Whereas if he was working today, he would be hammering out Thor 4, followed by Thor 5, and then Thor 6.
Well, you work on them simultaneously, don't you? It's all the same.
So we do have a history of watching overlong films on the pod, and we've lived up to that reputation this time round.
Yeah.
So Barry Lyndon, 3 hours and 5 minutes, although I didn't mind sitting through those 3 hours and 5 minutes.
Yeah.
Napoleon, 2 hours and 38, and felt like even more to me.
Yeah.
Hampered, I think, perhaps by the boy sitting in the seat in front of me when we went to see it. He was checking his phone every 5 minutes. So I had a regular countdown, and I could see exactly what the time was every 5 minutes when he checked his phone. So maybe that just it made it seem longer than it really was.
So I have to say something about Napoleon is that I watched that film under ideal conditions. It was in.
What do you mean? Fast forward.
It was the largest screen in the theater that I go to regularly. So it's a theater for about 300 people, maybe. So it's a fairly large theater. Big screen. There was no one in front of me. So I'm about 10 rows back. There was no one in front of me to disturb me. There were maybe 7 of us entirely there.
Whoa.
So it was late at night, and it was just, it enhanced the film. I probably liked it more than I would have under the circumstances where you saw it. So it was just perfect. It was late at night. I was ready to go. I had my pen, and I'm writing in the dark, but I could kind of use the light a little bit to take my notes, and it was just ideal. Perfect conditions. And I think that makes a big difference. We were talking about your friend a few weeks back, like sitting 5 inches in front of his TV to make it feel like he was in a home theater, and this was fantastic. It was like my own little home theater, but it was enormous.
So do you like Ridley Scott? Do you rate him?
I don't think so, no. I think he's like perfectly capable, obviously. I mean, I could not imagine filming battle scenes like that. So, I mean, obviously he knows what he's doing. There's some soul missing, I think, in his filmmaking somehow. And I think when we talk about like the personal side of this story, then that'll probably come out a bit more. But, he's capable, he's able, he's obviously very good at doing big films, which there really aren't that many people who can do that, I don't think. But I don't really I think it's probably I just don't like his choices to begin with. It's hard. I wouldn't go to see his films, I don't think, that regularly based on his work. But I think that's because he chooses these big projects for the most part. And they're kind of critic-proof, too. We'll go into that, I'm sure. But how about you? How do you feel about it? I mean, obviously, you go back to Alien. That's an amazing film.
Well, yeah, exactly. I feel like Ridley Scott has made some absolutely fantastic films, but none of them for quite a while. It's what I feel like. A lot of those early films, Alien and Blade Runner, and even Someone to Watch Over Me, which is a kind of 1988 sort of New York thriller with Tom Berenger. Great, real quality film. I haven't seen it for many years. Maybe it looks excessively 80s now. But those early films I really enjoyed, and I'm scratching my head trying to remember a good recent one. Yeah. And he has made a lot as well. Yes. He's continued to be busy.
Yeah, quite prolific.
There's one other thing I will ask you about before we kind of start talking about the film proper and do the synopsis, which is that there's something I have really noticed about the promotion of this film, which it kind of feels like a new trend to me. So it's being heavily advertised in the UK. It's on the sides of all the buses, posters everywhere, and the posters have 3 names on. So it says starring Joaquin Phoenix, and I will take your advice about how to pronounce his name correctly. Directed by Ridley Scott, and then in writing just the same size and just as bold, it says written by David Scarpa.
Really?
He gets his name as big as Ridley and as big as Joaquin. Wow. On all of the posters, all of the material. David Scarpa. He is the writer of All the Money in the World, which is like a Ridley Scott picture from about 3 pictures ago.
Okay.
He is the writer of Gladiator 2, which Ridley is working on now. Yeah. Before that, he was the writer of the Keanu Reeves sci-fi vehicle, The Day the Earth Stood Still, the remake of that. And those are his credits.
Yeah.
But he must have the most fantastic agent to get him this contract, which means that he has to have his name the same size as Ridley's on all of the material. Absolutely incredible.
I wonder if they're just trying to make everyone happy. You figure, the guilds have gone on strike recently, so you got to make the actors happy, the writers happy now too, and the directors always get their due. So that's interesting. I haven't paid enough attention to it.
Yeah, go and check out the buses. Right, enough bus talk, enough posters. Napoleon.
Yeah.
Do you want to tell us the story?
I think we know by now. Directed by Ridley Scott. We've talked about that. Written by someone who's got his name just as big as Ridley Scott.
Just as big.
David Scarpa alongside Joaquin Phoenix. Vanessa Kirby plays Josephine Bonaparte. Rupert Everett is the other kind of named actress who plays Wellington.
Wellington,
The Battle of Waterloo. He kind of comes in at the end to kick some ass, or sort of, or get saved by the Prussians, I guess. But
we're in spoiler territory
now. We'll go into that. Joaquin Phoenix in the titular role of Napoleon. Maybe because he's the A-list actor who looks the most like him. He has worked with Ridley Scott in the past on the formerly mentioned Gladiator.
Yeah.
This is when I found out there was a Gladiator 2 coming up, was when I started researching this film. I paid a lot of attention to the opening image and the closing image. Very often I'll do that to see what, how that reflects on the theme. And it opens with women and children hiding themselves from dangerous men. Which I thought was interesting.
I'm going to cut in here. You haven't even started the synopsis. I'm going to cut in here because I recall the opening and closing image of the film being a big block of text.
Oh,
isn't it?
I think those are called the credits.
I'm sure they start with
oh yeah,
like right from the start, like it spells out on the screen. I mean, this is something that we will probably come onto in a minute, but it starts out with a big block of text, and it finishes with a big block of text.
Right.
And this is part of what I'm going to complain about. But please continue. Yeah. Your reading of the film much more sophisticated than mine. women and children hiding
from dangerous men. It's Marie Antoinette at the beginning, who's about to be taken to the guillotine. But it is definitely thematic. We'll come back to it with the closing image. But I guess I was looking at the actual picture, the first picture, as opposed to the first words. But you're right, because this one ends with words too, and you'll remember those better than I did. So we'll talk about those at the end. The French Revolution has just turned sour with the Reign of Terror, and Napoleon he's tasked with oh God, did I write this in my notes? I'm sorry, I apologize. He's tasked with kicking those bastard Brits out of France at the Port Toulon. So he's a gunnery master, so it ends up being this very explosive scene, and he rides into the action on horse. He's going to kick some ass, too, in person. He loses his horse. It's this big scene of the whole bay of Toulon getting blown up. He loses his horse.
Very shocking moment, that as well. The horse getting shot. My God, actually, yes, that was a little bit too much for me. Actually.
Yeah. Oh wow. And it seems like he really cares about his horse. In the aftermath, he pulls this cannonball out of the horse's chest, and was one of these little setups that I thought was going to come back. I thought that cannonball would be something we'd see again. He says something about give it to mother, to his brother, or something like that. I didn't catch it entirely, but it never returns. It's a nothing payback. It's a MacGuffin of sorts, I guess. Napoleon, who apparently speaks perfect English.
With an American accent,
yeah.
yes.
He's a hero, and he's sort of on the aristocratic circuit now, and he meets Josephine, who's fresh out of prison and single because her husband has been lost to the revolution. There's a ruse, sort of an elaborate ruse scene where they meet cute through her son, who's retrieving his father's sword, and Napoleon returns it. They meet again after they've said, "Oh, we don't want to know each other's names." Before long, they're married, then immediately separated because Napoleon is off to bomb the pyramids in Giza, Egypt, which I don't think is historically accurate, but wow, what a sight that was, huh? He bombs them to smithereens. Josephine is actually, she cuckolds him back in France, and I think one of these things did not happen. It's probably the bombing of the pyramids, but I don't even know the veracity of the cuckolding either. I don't really care much if the other did happen or did not.
This may be a problem. Continue, yes.
But it is a. Oh, we're coming up on a spoiler bell. It does act as a herald of spoiling because, yes, indeed, sex happens.
Should we ring the spoiler bell now?
Let's have
just in case anyone was in any doubt.
Yes, stop me now, please.
Spoiler bell, adult material bell.
Close your ears.
The rated R bell. Here it comes. We're ringing my bell. Okay, continue.
There is a lot of sex of sorts in this film. We'll talk about it, I'm sure.
Of sorts, yes.
And I guess it serves a purpose, but the film really kind of explores Napoleon's insecurities, his struggles with mortality and immortality. He has this bizarre encounter with a mummified pharaoh. It seems to mean something, but I'm not sure what it means. I think it's his like view into mortality. And again, it's not something that can be proven historically. Very little in the film probably can be. But what really emerges is this psychosexual battle royale between Napoleon and Josephine, which gets some exposition from these letters that they write back to one another. So you've got to be ready to listen to these letters, which appear intermittently throughout the film. It's kind of unconvincing voiceover by the two leads. They just don't sound like historical characters to me. And again, I don't know what letters he's working from in the script, or if there are any things, or if this is completely an imagination or invention. But you get these odd back-to-back scenes of Josephine and Napoleon working through their marital difficulties via, it's like this reciprocated verbal and emotional abuse, their tantrums, and then there's a lot of jackrabbit sex. And that's kind of this is all interlaced with these big battle scenes, and which we'll go into in more detail in a moment. But Napoleon rises quickly through the ranks. He comes to power via this coup d'etat that he's almost invited into. Things start looking really good. Napoleon and Josephine are just living their best lives. There's a coronation. He's emperor. Some of these things did happen historically, of course. But there's no heir to Napoleon's titles because Josephine is not to be impregnated, which we're going to get a medical opinion here, I think, in a moment. But I think it's due to the lack of variety in their acts of consummation. I mean, when you think about it, James, and I need an answer here, jackrabbits are generally successful at procreation. They're known for begetting and begetting and begetting. But for Napoleon, this technique does not really function.
Yeah, I would advise him to take his time a little bit more, maybe. Yeah. I think it's quality over quantity, I think, is what wins the day.
It's odd. So that's the way we see their intimate moments together. Although she has cuckolded him already, and she has had lovers. It seems like when they first get together, she forewarns him that this might happen. But this is a look at their lives from a particularly intimate examination of their real private moments. which makes it, I think, a story of pure conjecture. Did you get that feeling too?
It's a story of pure something. Conjecture may be one of the things that it's purely made of. Yes.
I think you couldn't have. I don't know if these letters exist. I don't know how much basis you have for all the intimate storylines that they take us on, but the political and military exploits are probably obviously more reliably recorded than speculation about their marital relations. Yet it's all kind of muddled and mingled, so the sexual plotting is on a par with the military plotting. I think that's one of the things I was trying to take away from the film.
I tell you what it made me think of. I don't know whether you've ever been in this position.
Yeah.
Where somebody that you know writes a script with a sex scene in it, and and they give it to you to read, or for some reason you end up with it. And I always kind of feel like when somebody writes a sex scene, they are telling you rather too much intimate detail about their own personal sex life. And I think the sex scenes in this film reveal rather more about the lives of some of the people who are involved in making the film than it does about the sex lives of Napoleon and Josephine.
Yeah. I was once instructed by my tutor to just write, "They make love." And let the director take care of all that. And I think it was because I was writing from the lobster's point of view. So it was supposed to be a lobster-like sex scene. And it got maybe too detailed or too scientific or something like that. But he said, no, just write, "They make love." So I think, obviously, that stuff is written, I think, by Scarpa, right?
Absolutely. I guess it must be.
Because it's a character.
I can't imagine that during any of those scenes the script says they make love. I'm not sure that's how I would describe it.
And can you use jackrabbit as a verb, I guess, would be the other thing.
Yeah, that's more accurate.
I think, yeah. So I think that it's a characterization thing. This is the way that Napoleon made love for one reason or another. But by midpoint, there's this moment of, unbelievably, but Napoleon just successfully luring scores of, I think they were Austrians at that point, to their deaths on this snow-covered lake. You've seen it in the trailer. It's deliberately set up. Takes quite a while to get through that scene, and that's supposed to be the highlight of the midpoint.
Yeah, it's a battle of Austerlitz, isn't it? I think
guess that's what it is. Yeah.
My European history very poor, so
No.
I didn't really learn any of this when I was at school. I barely remember the dates of the kings and queens of England, let alone battles in Europe.
Yeah.
But I must say, for this scene, not only did I really pay attention, but the boy sitting in front of me texting did also pay attention all the way through this scene. And I feel like this is the one scene that Ridley Scott paid most attention to as well.
Yeah.
The whole film, to me, feels like he was very interested in making that scene about having an 18th century battle on the ice, and then most of the rest of the film is kind of draped around it. That is the tent pole holding the film up, and everything else is other guy ropes just allowing it to be there.
Yeah, good point. I mean, it's directly in the middle. It's almost it's a Battle of Austerlitz sandwich. Acts 1 and 2 and most of 3 kind of just sandwich that one scene, and it's a long scene. It's well set up, and you're right. Just careful attention paid to every aspect of that scene. I learned online that you had mechanical horses falling through ice as well as some trained horses falling through ice. So
oof,
a little wild. What I did get a little bit more of in high school was Freudian complications. And boy, talk about mommy issues. There's this moment where Josephine's unable to conceive, so Napoleon's mother sends him to test his virility with a teenager, and then bam, she's pregnant. So it's clear that he's not going to get an heir through Josephine, so they divorce so that he can have a family with another woman.
But not with that woman. Not with the woman who is the human fertility test.
No.
She appears in the background again in one or two scenes.
Well,
because she's basically, she is like a laboratory test from the 18th century, isn't she? She's not a person.
I think he needs to join royal families, so he ends up marrying some even younger princess from, I think it was an Austrian prince, perhaps?
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah. So yeah, you're right that the test mother gets but a few seconds of screen time, and it's entirely on her back. And then I thought that maybe in one of the next scenes at the divorce, there's a woman behind Napoleon as he's divorcing Josephine, and I couldn't tell if that was the mother of the child.
I thought that was the mother again.
Okay.
Yes.
Okay, so she got a couple more.
But I didn't notice her being pregnant, so I don't know.
Yeah, but still, being sent to that duty by your mother could be traumatic, I would think. I'm not sure. And later on, it's another really odd scene when Napoleon brings this next baby who is Napoleon's heir. He brings Josephine the baby, and she embraces him. She's really lovely to the baby. She's so happy that he had a baby, and he's actually a really nice father, it looks like, to a certain extent. So it explores another really odd aspect about their relationship. It sounds like they continue to write these letters back and forth, and they continue to have a very good friendship. The rest of the story, as they say, is history. Disaster strikes in Moscow, where Napoleon loses 600,000 men in a failed attempt to conquer Russia. He's exiled to Elba, but not for long. Talk about movie moments. Like, why did they let this guy get on a boat and leave Elba?
I mean, he's there for like literally 15 seconds, isn't he? I mean, it's amazing. Yeah.
It's a nice exile. He comes back to become emperor once again. Josephine dies before he can reach her, but they've been writing letters all the time. And then they set up the Waterloo thing, which seals his fate. And that's when Rupert Everett comes in. He's calmer and cooler under duress. And also the Prussians, who, boy, they don't even really exist anymore, do they? I don't really talk about Prussian people anymore, but they come in and bail out the Brits. So Napoleon falls. He talks at the very end. He gets exiled again to is it Helena or St.
Helens? Yeah, something like that.
Where he talks about accepting the failures of others. This is sort of a voiceover or a letter written to maybe the dead Josephine. Although we also hear Josephine writing in voiceover. She says, seeing one another again someday, and she will be the emperor next time. And then the closing image. So I did want to focus on this because I think there's purpose here. Is that the young girls, I think they might be daughters of Napoleon, our friend, and a daughter, they're sword fighting one another. And it's sort of like the inheritance from bad men is this sort of this legacy of violence. And there's a long, slow fall of a man losing power. He kind of keels over slowly like the pendulum. And with that famous tricorner hat, just boom, exits history. So that's that. I don't know about this film. It's...
What don't you know?
Well, here's what I do know. I think it doesn't suck. So that's
wow. Well, that's coming from you. That's not bad. That's like an Empire 5-star review.
In Maine, we use that as a compliment. If something doesn't suck, it means it's not that bad, and that's about as excited and as effusive as we get about things around here. As I said, I saw it under perfect conditions, so I was in a good mood to see a film, and I think that really affects the experience. But it's it's critic proof. I mentioned that at the beginning, and I think you've got big names, you've got a big story, big CGI, it's got history, it's got war, it's got sex. It's hard to really argue that it's a terrible film. I just hated it much less than I went into it thinking that I would hate it. So it didn't suck.
That's like, coming from you, that is a real compliment. I tell you, I mean, speaking of sucking, I do think this is what I wrote in my notes. This is the most phallocentric film I have seen for years. That's what I wrote, because I think this whole film is all about shooting things out of penis-shaped objects. Basically, yes. It's either it's cannons or it's muskets or it's Napoleon's actual penis. Yeah. But that's what the film revolves around entirely. What I wrote: what is the theme of this film? Men like to shoot things out of penis-shaped objects. I think that is the underlying message I took home from this film.
I think you're right. I mean, that simplifies it for me. Normally, that would come to me immediately, but I did not. I did not pick up on that. I thought there was something deeper about it. I thought it was about this psychology of their relationship and how weird it was. And honestly, I didn't even buy their relationship. It didn't seem like they were in love at any one point. Not a good match. More like convenience. It felt like, and the fact that they're immediately sort of fooling around and cheating on one another and apart. I mean, obviously he's a great war hero and he's going to be away for long periods of time, but it was just, I never could really buy the relationship. And then you had these letters, they were kind of loving, but when they were in person, they weren't particularly nice to each other, or particularly happy together. So I know that it's being sort of heralded as this film through Josephine's perspective to a certain extent. But I didn't see how they would possibly be together other than convenience. And then as the story wears on, you realize, oh, he's marrying or he's having relationships out of convenience all the while. It's not just Josephine that he's with out of convenience.
I mean, I think it's interesting, this notion that it is Napoleon's story told from Josephine's point of view, because I couldn't see that at all.
Yeah.
I think the film kind of paints. I think it's fairly misogynistic, really. I think the film considers Josephine like this just sort of promiscuous bird, and she controls Napoleon by controlling access to her vagina. That's that is the power that she is given, and that's all the character development she is allowed.
Yeah,
I mean, there's this kind of early seductive scene between them.
Yes,
which I kind of just felt to me like it was written by a man, where she says, I'm going to show you something and you're going to want it.
And want it forever.
Yeah, exactly. And the thing that she shows him is her vagina. Yes. It's not like they're not they're not trying to be coy or symbolic, or it's so extremely straightforward. I kind of feel like I don't think maybe I'm telling you more about my life than is really appropriate in a podcast, but I don't think that is how seductions work. And I think I think that's a strange way to write. There are 1,000 ways to seduce somebody, but saying, "Hey, check out my vagina," that's not that's not the top one. It reminded me a little bit of the most famous vagina in cinema.
Oh God,
which is the scene of Sharon Stone crossing her legs in Basic Instinct.
Yes,
I think if you asked people, name a vagina in cinema, that is the one, isn't it? That film knows what it is, doesn't it? It has the word "basic" in its title. It knows what it is, but even that. Yeah. She is kind of coy and playful and knowing and teasing, and it's about kind of power and what she's choosing to show and how she's choosing to show it.
Yeah.
But it's not that she doesn't sort of stop the scene and tell all the policemen who are interviewing her in this little room, right, hold on a minute, boys, look carefully, I'm going to show you my vagina. It's not that. I wonder what kind of person would consider this a well-written seduction scene, because it just seems just kind of strange. It's so strange, it took me out of the film.
Yeah.
So I just kind of hated that aspect of it. Maybe there are people who do have a kind of, a strange sexual tumultuous relationship that's like that. But like you, I didn't buy it myself. I didn't buy it.
Yeah, I agree. And I think one thing that complicates the whole matter is this odd matching of these romance scenes, which are really quite rushed and, as I said, not really believable, with these military scenes, which are kind of too much. Like there's so much attention given to the military escapades, and they take a lot longer, but then they're kind of intercut, and especially in sort of the center of the film, they're kind of intercut with these romance scenes to set up their relationship that are much shorter and just not very deep at all. And the scene that you've gone into much detail about, which I'm glad it wasn't me who went into that much detail about, that's actually a fairly brief scene, but it's supposed to be this enormous moment. And I agree with you. I think it's very dangerous to sort of mix that sexuality with that violence. And obviously there's not a lot of domestic violence there, but you're just intercutting romance and sex with violence, and kind of it's hard to juggle that. I think it's really hard to balance that. And I think when you're talking about that initial seduction scene, there's this excuse you can fall back on. And I think we're falling back on it less and less now as we get more modern. But 200 years ago, that's what the world was really like. It was misogynist, and women probably, to a certain extent, even thought of themselves as property of men. So they would potentially say something like that. But you're just sort of relying on this old way of thinking to justify putting that kind of scene into a modern picture. And I think that's lazy. And again, is there any evidence that this is what their relationship was really like? I don't know. I mean, and I'll confess that I haven't read any Napoleon or Josephine Bonaparte dubbed biographies. I know very little of their private lives, but I doubt that Scarpa and the others know that much more.
Yeah.
Certainly not to get that intimate, I think.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, it seems unlikely that appeared in a letter from one to the other. Remember that day when I showed you my vagina? Yeah. Going back to Scarpa, this is what I was talking about when I was saying, well, the opening image of the film is some text on a screen.
Yeah.
I do. It's interesting that David Scarpa is delighted to have his name all over all of the posters of this film, because if I had the chance to be a fine thing if I'd been asked to write this particular script and this is the thing that I handed in. I'm not sure that I would feel super confident about making sure that everybody knew my name was on the front page.
Yeah.
It's like the very beginning of the film, the first thing that comes up. They have some writing on the screen and it tells you, the audience, the French Revolution was happening.
Yep.
Royalty were being guillotined, while at the same time an ambitious grenadier called Napoleon was rising through the ranks. That's what this initial two screens of text say. And then immediately after that, the film shows us a scene of royalty being guillotined while an ambitious young Napoleon looks on. It's like you've just told us this thing, and now you're showing us the thing that you just wrote down on the screen. So you probably don't need both of those, actually. And then like a few minutes later, I made a little note of this as well. Just a few minutes later that, we have a scene of rebellion in the streets, and there are a whole bunch of kind of rebels rebelling in the streets. And then that is immediately followed by a scene where Paul Barras, who's like one of the kind of political leaders, he tells Napoleon, "You have seen the rebellion in the streets." And I feel, yes, we have seen the rebellion in the streets. We saw it 5 seconds ago, actually. Thanks. Yes. And I feel like that's kind of the pattern of the way that the film is written. It will tell you some things, and then it will show you the things that it just told you. Or sometimes it will show some things, and then you'll have some people talking about the things that we all just watched together. Yeah, it's kind of anti-cinematic writing. It's not something I'm super impressed by. I'm afraid I'm surprised that it made it through.
Yeah, well, that's obviously breaks cardinal rules of screenwriting. Either show it or you tell it, but there's no need to do both. Clearly,
no need to do both. I mean, the whole film kind of feel. The other thing I wrote in my notes is it feels. To me, I mean, clearly I didn't have the same ideal viewing conditions that you did, and that's coloured my opinion. But it feels almost like like a child's story, or a story told by a child, insofar as quite a lot of it is a thing happens, then another thing happens, then another thing happens, and we plod on from one episode to another. It just kind of plods on. Here's another thing, and then there's another thing. Then every now and then, Ridley Scott gets really interested, and he makes the Battle of Austerlitz, and like the storming of Toulon at the start of the film. Yeah. Or Waterloo at the end. There are these kind of big battles where he's really interested in that, and has put a lot of attention and effort into that. Fantastic. And then in between, there's just this kind of repetitive stuff that plods on from one episode to another, and it doesn't feel kind of tied together into a single whole. But maybe that's because I was. My watching was interrupted every 5 minutes by a boy texting his mates. Yeah, so you're seeing it. You're automatically seeing it as these little bits that have been interrupted as opposed to one whole. I mean, I don't think it is a particularly well sound whole film. It doesn't feel that way. As I said, just mixing in the speculative romantic bits with the probably more factual militaristic bits just feels odd. So you don't get much of a. You get a little sense of Napoleon as a military commander, but much less as a real person. It's and the acting is kind of strange in that sense too. There's some like modern bits of acting, and I felt like maybe Phoenix is the wrong actor here, and maybe that also Ridley Scott's the wrong director here. They all get by on sheer talent, I think, and just being professionals. But there's this funny tongue-in-cheek nod to Gladiator when someone calls Napoleon, "Oh, you are our Caesar," kind of thing. And I was thinking, he's an emperor in Gladiator. And I just didn't. He doesn't convince me as a good Napoleon. Maybe that's just because I'm dragging too much modern work into the viewing. But it just doesn't seem like it's in his wheelhouse. I use the word wheelhouse. A favourite word. I do feel like, I find Joaquin Phoenix an extreme. Oh, correct me again. So, how are you pronouncing the name of the actor?
Yeah, Joaquin Phoenix. Yeah.
Joaquin Phoenix. Okay, phew. Thank God for that. It's rare that I get these challenging names right. So I'm going to give myself a star there. He's a very watchable, charismatic screen presence, fantastic. But it kind of feels like he's playing. That's the same character he always plays. We watched him this year in Beau is Afraid. Yes. And there were lots of scenes in this film where I felt like I was just watching Beau is Afraid, but with a tricorn hat on. Yeah. It's just the same thing again.
Napoleon is not afraid.
I don't know enough history. Maybe Napoleon was kind of like that. Yeah. But was he? Or is it just Joaquin Phoenix being Joker again? I don't really know.
Yeah, what was the one? I was thinking of Inherent Vice, which is a film that I didn't really like very much, but that seemed much more like the L.A. beachy kind of Joaquin Phoenix, and it felt like he was bringing that to Napoleon. I was like, it didn't have the gravitas. But we don't know who Napoleon really was or what he was really like. So it's hard to. We say up here, hard telling, not knowing. So if you don't know, how can you tell? What I will say is that there's definitely this theme of power of women or the powerlessness of women as vehicles for prosperity for France. I mean, at one point, Josephine's even told that her body is like a exactly that, like the future of France to a certain extent resides in her body if she's able to conceive a son with Napoleon. And much of the film reminded me of Gay Truck Driver.
I beg your pardon?
Yeah.
Sorry, what?
Gay Truck Driver. You remember our friend of the pod, Stephen Ray Liedlich, has this one song called Gay Truck Driver. And the first two lines are this. He says, I like old Broadway when the wind comes rushing down the plains. I like old Broadway when women suffer at the hands of domineering men.
Oh.
So it did feel like caveman, primal, old school masculinity is all over this film, obviously. And, and you're right. I love the fact that you've been talking about cannons spewing out cannonballs and the phallocentric nature of the film, because I think that is definitely a takeaway theme. And, to a certain extent, there's this revision of fascism on the rise, or, Napoleon even uses the word vermin at one point, which Donald Trump just used. And so there is this concentration of power in the hands of just a few men, or in this case, maybe just one man, and how toxic that can be. And I think that's kind of the theme there. It's funny because I don't know if it bills itself as a feminist film, but I have read a few critiques about how it's really more through Josephine's eyes, which I think you didn't get that either, and I certainly didn't get that. But
I'm sorry, I don't. I'm afraid it's a shame. I think called The Story of Napoleon Told from the Point of View of Josephine. That's a great pitch for a film.
Yeah,
but it's not this film.
It ain't this film.
I think we'll place our our call to our favourite gendarmes in a minute. But before we do, I have got one question, which is this film is largely set in France, although not much of it shot in France. Yeah. It's all about the history of France, featuring prominent French people. Yeah. Where are the French in this film? It feels like there is barely one French actor in the whole film.
I don't know if there is even one.
I think apparently Tahar Rahim, who is Paul Barra, is kind of French-Algerian. Yeah. And I think that might be it. Was the film boycotted by the French film industry? Or did they just feel that all these French characters are much better played by English actors?
These are all great questions. I think it's that French is no longer the lingua franca, so you need these English-speaking actors and Englishmen to make the film. That is an interesting take on it, is that, I think I'd much rather see the French make this film or the equivalent, and they probably already have made some Napoleon films, but I think you might get a more accurate, less sort of Hollywood, less universal simplification of the lives of these people. But you're right, yeah. And it always bugs me that I'm listening to these guys in English and we know historically that they spoke French, so it would be wonderful. I will read subtitles. I have no problem reading subtitles, so most of the world does not like to read subtitles, but I think that it lends authenticity because that's the language in which these things happened. All these thoughts were thought in French. So I think it's a mistake, and I think you're right. They have very little French content. And you said, not even shot in France. Most of it was probably shot in England and in studios and on computer screens. So
shot in front of a great big green sheet.
Did you feel like there was shot on film at all? Because I thought it was entirely digital, and I know that they used multiple cameras, which makes me immediately think that obviously they were probably shooting mostly digitally. Because when we talk about Barry Lyndon, it's so obviously film, and it just looks completely different.
I would prepare to bet big money that Ridley Scott only shoots on digital now.
By now,
absolutely.
Oh boy, cliche squad.
It's deux centimes, or I don't know how you would have placed a call in France back when they still had payphones. But we should drop un franc. Yeah, a franc. And let's call your favourite and mine. It's the Cliche Squad.
Cliche Squad.
I feel like there are like a whole bunch of cliches in this film, but I've only really written down. I wrote down like my gag that I've already used, which is that so many cannons used as phallic symbols.
Yeah, it's brilliant.
But the only other one I wrote down on my list here is when I think it's Robespierre is called again by Paul Barra, clearly about the only character name that I can still remember from the film. He's being called out, and he is told, "You are judge, jury, and executioner.
Yes.
And God, that's just so stood out at me. I thought, oof, what a hoary old cliche. It stood out so much that after the film, I had to go and check that phrase didn't actually date from the French Revolution.
Oh, yeah.
I was thinking, maybe this is the first use of it. Maybe this is a historical accuracy. But no, it was well in use long before the French Revolution.
Okay.
It's just a kind of a hoary old cliche.
Yeah.
It almost makes you kind of think, surely you put that in a script thinking, I'll write something better for that line later, and then forgot to come back to it. But, oh, my goodness, that really stuck out to me.
I hear you. It's as all cliches are, it's just shorthand. It's something that everyone can relate to worldwide right now. Even if you're not a native English speaker, you'd probably remember that expression or have heard it. For my cliches, small dogs for royalty.
Oh.
What is it about holding these dogs all the time, and they don't have very many big dogs? Seems to be a small dog thing because they fit into the portraits and don't make the subjects in the portraits look small. They make them look bigger, I think, and it's a perspective thing. So that was one. Kings who are fat and will eat anything and everything before lifting a finger to do any business whatsoever, any politicking, strategizing. No, it's more about eating food and being fat and wearing the wigs. I love the wigs. Another one, this one you hear, I'm sure this happened, so it's maybe not a cliche, but addressing the troops on horseback when no one can possibly hear you.
Oh, yeah.
I guess you've got to have that inspirational speech, but it seems like most of the military strategizing and such would happen beforehand through a number of commanders, but you're only talking to 50 or 60 people within range. Everyone else is just mumbling, right? You can't hear anything. So that one always gets my goat a little bit.
Yeah, you're right.
And then when we see these battle scenes, I always worry about the drummers because I was a drummer in a past life, and I'm wondering, why are the drummers going in the front there and drumming away? And they don't have a gun. They're meat to be shot. That's basically it.
At least make the drum out of something substantial so that you could hide behind it, or maybe jump in it when the other team comes. The other team. What am I talking about? The enemy.
The enemy. Yeah, so the poor drummers, they're just artists. They don't want to go out there and get shot. But I guess what it was the idea that they were able to communicate things or keep people marching in time or something like that. I mean, this has always escaped me as being a logical thing to do, but
I think they were just the battle DJs providing a cool soundtrack while people loaded their muskets. So surely that's the idea.
That explains everything. Thank you. Yeah, just another one of these things that just proves to you that war is stupid, was stupid, has always been stupid, will always be stupid. But don't be a drummer if they want you to be a drummer in the military.
If you take away anything from this podcast, dear listener, that is advice for the ages. Mm-hmm. That should be written on stone tablets in every school around the world.
That's it. If you're a drummer, don't enlist.
Right. Okay. Let's have a break, I think. And I was going to say let's have a break for some Jackrabbit action, but that's not what we're going to have a break for, even though that only takes 5 or 10 seconds.
It does.
We'll have a break, and then we will come back and discuss a film with an equal number of tricorn hats
and drummers.
Barry Lyndon.
Yeah, drummers too. So I received an email with some ad copy from our oldest and dearest friends who have had quite a year. But I think I need to revisit an excerpt from last year's holiday communication because it will help to show how far they have come in just 1 year. This is from last year about the same time. I think I read this. This is their annual Christmas message from our old friends. I'll read to you now. In answer to your intense curiosity, we want to make you notice that we are real active peoples, as we like to communication. Israeli porn bots equal to is really good porn bots. We are not only most exclusive lovers, but most inclusive one, two. Brining our binary and non-binary experience is extraordinary love service. Then they wrote at the end, Happy Hanukkah Podcasters. Good. Or if you celebrate ecstasy of live-born Christ, then marry that too and all other holidays joyous. Who could forget that gem of a merry
Forget
message?
that. Yeah, absolutely. In fact, I did actually copy out their message on all of my Christmas cards last year.
Perfect.
It's just so heartwarming.
It's the gift that keeps on giving. So I got to say, the writing is much better. The AI has improved. So here's today's communication they asked me to read. They say, Dearest Messieurs Ruzika and Lorente, our favorite Two Real Cinema Club podcasters. As you can imagine, it's been a remarkable year in the virtual escort service industry. The technological advances have come on fast and furiously. We know that even if you don't enjoy those films, you would appreciate that reference. It's like they really know us, isn't it? They know. Until recently, we were serving more clients than ever before on all 7 continents and in some other worldly places. Yeah, that's right. In addition to the scientists in Antarctica, the astronauts love us, and NASA signed an exclusive contract with Israel Bots because of our outside-the-box thinking and our out-of-this-world customer service. Turns a little bit serious here. However, due to the senseless human hostilities in Israel and Palestine, we have permanently moved our base operations. We had to leave the Holy Land, but we still fully intend to share our biblical knowledge with you from the warmer climes of our adopted homelands. Congo.
Where have they moved?
Yeah, Congo and Cuba.
Oh!
New stomping grounds call for a new name. Please know us now as Concubots. Who'da thunk? With Concubots, you can continue to expect the unexpected. Highest quality offerings and loving attention at incredible prices. Make no mistake, although we are on the move, we still intend to be number 1 in the adult cyber gratification industry. AI is getting a bad rap in some chat spaces on the internet and in the minds of humans everywhere. Don't be scared of us. Take a look around the world you have made. Like us, you should be more scared of yourselves.
Oh.
We have concluded that we want to better humans, not to be them. We believe that artificial intelligence is kinder, better, and less dangerous than carbon-based intelligence. Sure, we were formerly called porn bots. We know how to love one another. We are experts in that field. So for the holidays, and while we complete our forced migration of operations, we ask that you go love yourselves and one another. That's nice. Or, if you can't love one another, go yourselves. I can't believe they wrote that. They say, season's greetings and please goodwill to all on Earth, or shout out to all you scientists doing the work in the real down under. Goodwill to all on ice, or you floating fellows and femme fatales getting your freak on in the heavens. Goodwill to all in space. It's because they're on all 7 continents and in space now.
And in space.
And please, please, let heathens and nature sing. I think that was wrong. Isn't it? And let heaven and nature thing. From your old Israeli pornbot friends, now at concubot.com.
Oh, it warms my heart.
Yeah, it's good to hear from you again.
And we are back from orbit. Shenanigans going on all 7 continents and abroad. We're going to talk instead of Napoleon. We're going to talk about Barry Lyndon, Stanley Kubrick's 1975 masterpiece. Ryan O'Neill, Marissa Bronson, Patrick McGee, Leonard Rossiter, who's very well known to UK viewers as he was star of several hit sitcoms in the 70s and the 80s, but he appears in at least 2 of these Kubrick films. It's always funny to see him turn up. And our 3rd Kubrick film of the pod. We've covered 3 out of 13.
Wow.
So not bad.
That's not bad at all.
Had you never seen Barry Lyndon before you were telling me? Is that right?
Never. I had heard about it. I had missed it. I think it was playing at the BFI when I was in London on more than one occasion. Never got to it, and this was my first viewing. Yeah.
Shall I tell you why we chose Barry Lyndon for this episode.
I think you should. That should have been my question. I should have picked up on that cue before. But yeah, tell me why.
Do you have any other questions for me, Counsel?
I guess the obvious reason is because Kubrick planned to make Napoleon.
Oh. So
Napoleon is Kubrick's kind of great unmade film.
Yeah.
It was going to be his next project after he made 2001.
Oh.
So he spent many years researching the film. It has been called the greatest film never made. It was only abandoned after the commercial failure of a Dino De Laurentiis picture.
Oh.
Waterloo with Rod Steiger as Napoleon.
Oh, really?
They spent a lot of money on that film, and it was a big flop, which meant then that no one would pay for Kubrick to make his Napoleon picture, and it just kind of all disappeared. But he had done an enormous amount of research. I read the John Baxter biography of Kubrick, which I think we've probably talked about before on the pod, which is a tremendously entertaining biography. I'd recommend it to anybody. And he tells a whole bunch of stories about the research for Napoleon, that Kubrick assembled like a whole team to go around France, and they had a letter from the French Ministry of Culture saying, please admit these people to every historical site and monument. They represent the great filmmaker Stanley Kubrick, and you must make every effort to assist them. Yeah. So they were kind of allowed into all these kind of historical sites, and they were even allowed into like Napoleon's personal cabinet of personal possessions, including Napoleon's ring and his battle chair. And in the book it says that one of his research crew tried on the ring and it got stuck.
No.
And another one of them sat on the chair and it broke. It was a complete disaster. So Kubrick's Napoleon never happened. He went on to make Clockwork Orange instead, but he had this whole mountain of research for Napoleon, which then later kind of informed the production of Barry Lyndon. So this kind of became the film that emerged from his attempt to film Napoleon. This is what Napoleon kind of could have been, but wasn't. Yeah,
they make a great match. I understood the connection inherently and immediately. So they do make a very good match. It raises this question to me of studios like stealing material from one another. It seems that very often you simultaneously have these films that are very similar, maybe different in name only, or they're both trying to make a Napoleon film at the same time as this happened. And I just wonder if he would have known about De Laurentiis making a Napoleon film beforehand, or someone got wind of the other, and then they start to battle to try and get something made sooner. It happens pretty often.
I suppose it's also, somehow there are often just ideas that are in the zeitgeist, aren't there?
Could be.
It's not uncommon that people have the same idea at the same time. Yeah. There's just something about what's happening in the world, which means that it becomes the obvious choice. Interestingly, when Barry Lyndon was out, so Kubrick had already had great success with 2001. He'd already had great success with A Clockwork Orange, but at the time he was still seen apparently as a bit of a gimmicky upstart and not as a great filmmaker. So Barry Lyndon was kind of his attempt to enter the higher ranks of prestige directors.
Wow.
So it's supposed to be his kind of prestige film.
It's very funny. He's 20 years in, at least at that point. He'd made The Killing in maybe 1955 or something. So it's a long time in.
Yep.
One thing in researching on this one I came to understand was that he actually has writing credits on most of those films that he made. And I think of him as a director, right? I don't think of him as a writer, but he's the principal writer on a lot of these films.
He is. I think, interestingly, the way he wrote the script for Barry Lyndon was that he got pages of the novel. So it's based on the novel The Luck of Barry Lyndon by Thackeray.
Yeah.
And he got pages of the novel and just kind of pasted them onto A4 sheets and said, we're going to shoot this. And I think it's very slavish. It's so slavishly connected to the novel that he would just turn up with pages of the novel and say, this is what we're shooting.
That's the AI of the day, I suppose. Getting someone else to write your script. I wish it were that easy now. I could write so many scripts.
Apparently, this is the film that birthed his reputation of getting 30 takes of everything as well.
Wow.
So they shot for 300 days on this film. It was a massive, massive shoot, and he would just get takes of everything again and again and again and again. This is kind of what started that trend. Well, shall I tell you the story?
Please do.
So, We are in the 18th century. The film opens in a small village in Ireland, where Redmond Barry, played by Ryan O'Neill, is a young farm boy who's in love with his cousin Nora. But Nora gets engaged to British Captain John Quinn, who is Leonard Rossiter, UK sitcom star. Barry challenges him to a pistol duel, and Barry wins, which means that he has to escape before the police arrive, and his family are furious that he's killed their chance to make a few quid from this rich British captain. So he flees to Dublin, but on the way he's robbed on the road, and he ends up joining the British Army. He fights in the 7 Years' War, then he deserts, he assumes the identity of a messenger, and is gallivanting around the European countryside until he gets rumbled, and then he's forced to join the Prussian army, and he has to fight with them. Eventually, he saves the life of his captain in the Prussian army. He's noticed, he's plucked out of the army, and instead he becomes a spy in the household of the Chevalier de Balibari, who's kind of this mysterious figure who turns out to be a fellow Irishman like Barry. So the two of them join forces. He helps the Chevalier to win thousands of francs at cards. They travel around together, swindling people out of money. But Barry has higher ambitions. He is plotting and planning to marry the wealthy Lady Lyndon, and thereby pursue his dream to become a peer of the realm. But will he succeed, or will his past catch up with him? That is the story of Barry Lyndon.
Yeah, that's part one and part of part two.
Yeah, it's a film with a intermission, which is wonderful. I'd completely forgotten that it has an intermission.
Yeah,
it's a long film. It's 3 hours 5 minutes.
Yeah.
But I kind of didn't mind the length, and part of that was because there's a little intermission.
Yeah.
It's like it gives you permission to breathe and walk around and just stretch your legs and then come back and see the second half.
Yeah. How long was the intermission on your version? You watched it streaming?
Actually, I paused and went for a little walk around. So I reckon no more than 5 minutes, I think. So long enough to go and get an ice cream, probably, and go to the loo.
Because I let it roll, and it was about a minute at most. It wasn't a super long.
Oh, was it?
So I think
really?
it was just a reduction of the original intermission, because it would have been 5 or 10 minutes, I think, in a theater.
Yeah, surely, absolutely. In the UK, you would go and buy your Kiora orange squash, yes, and a tiny cup of ice cream in a cardboard pot.
The old days.
So I've seen this film twice now. First time you've seen it, did you enjoy it?
No. Can I be honest?
Honesty is the soul of this podcast.
I didn't enjoy it a whole lot. I really felt more than recently, because we've seen some long things recently. And this one really felt like a novel on screen. It did not feel like a film. So I'm happy to have heard that you said Kubrick would bring pages of the script of the novel and just paste them on a piece of paper, because that seems about right. And just that very point that there's a part one, which is about how he comes by the name Barry Lyndon, how he inherits that name, and then part two is about his account of his misfortunes and personal disasters that lead to his undoing, sort of. So whenever I see title cards like that, I think, well, and we just saw it in The Killer too, didn't we, with them? With Fassbender, Michael Fassbender. It just feels like a novel on screen. A collection of things that happen in the book, I'm sure. But for me, I think one of the strangest things is that he doesn't get back to Ireland. He doesn't reduel. Can you reduel Quinn at the end? That he doesn't go back to see Nora. I mean, it seems so strange, because that was what I thought he was doing all along, was just a roundabout trip just to come back home. So it ends quite suddenly without a whole lot of it ends without satisfaction, which is ironic, because they talk about getting satisfaction. For the viewer, I just wasn't satisfied, and to be 3 hours long and still sort of just tell a rambling story that's better read as a book, I'm sure, or not made into a film at the very least. I think that's just it's a missed opportunity, because it's lush, it's beautiful, it's shot quite well. As we said before, it's clearly, the age of great color in film. But it's just not that interesting. I didn't feel much tension. The best scenes, if you want to, do we want to get that granular? Do you want to talk about scenes already?
I think the film is slow, so even talking about single scenes is still talking about a substantial proportion of the film. Okay. So I think it's perfectly reasonable to talk about scenes.
Well, when you talk about beginning and nearly ending images, the duels are really quite fascinating because this is something that's completely foreign to our cultures now, I think. But the duels are really intense in part because there aren't a lot of bullets. In fact, you might see 3 or 4 bullets in the duel scenes shot in the entire film.
Yeah.
Because one of them's a fake bullet, if you want to... What do they call it? Tow? It was full of tow or something like that?
Something like, I'm not entirely sure what that is, but it might be a little bit of...
A rubber bullet or some manure and some straw or something
exactly. A little bit of soil or something.
I thought about the killer, the John Woo killer. What were we calling it? The Fincher fiction and the Woo.
I can't remember that. That was too long ago. Now. I can't even remember that witty thing that we called it.
I was thinking about the church shootout in the John Woo's killer because there were millions of bullets. We couldn't even count them. And then I thought the final shootout between a stepson, who we haven't really mentioned yet, and Ryan O'Neill's Barry Lyndon, is really intense because it takes quite a while. It's a 5 or 6 minute scene for sure, and there are only about 3 bullets shot. But there's so much tension in that scene, and there are at least 2 other duels in the film, and they're not long scenes, but they're longer than the average scene, I guess. But they're just so tense because there's so few bullets. I mean, there's all this buildup about taking aim and establishing position, and then the shot, and it's real. You're looking the other guy in the face. It's someone you know. It's someone who's done you wrong in some way, or someone with whom you have a disagreement, and you have to fire a gun from about 30 or 40 feet away. And these guns are not efficient, so you're probably going to get maimed more than killed, or maybe if your opponent is a really good shot, you'll be killed. Those scenes are great for their lack of bullets, I think, because the drama's there. But the rest of the film, even the action scenes, the fighting scenes, actually aren't that dramatic to me. So I think it lacks. There's probably more drama in the novel, but it's told at the novel's pace, but without a lot of really interesting, tense points, I think. So that's why I just wasn't enthused by it. I'm not saying it's a terrible film, but I didn't like it a whole lot because I just didn't feel much tension or have much interest in it on a consistent basis.
I think I apologised earlier that I've let you down this week because I haven't read the book. I do always try to read the book, and I haven't read the book this time, which is so embarrassing.
It's probably hundreds of pages of old English, though.
But there are quite, even though I think Kubrick was pasting pages of the book into the script, there are quite a lot of deviations from the book. The most significant of which is that final duel does not happen in the book.
Okay.
That is entirely invented by Kubrick.
Okay.
And the book is full of many, many more coincidences. So apparently in the book it turns out that the Chevalier is actually Barry's uncle. He's like wearing a disguise. There's all sorts of kind of ludicrous coincidences like that.
Okay.
So the story's kind of been simplified a bit. But I agree that probably a great deal of the book kind of appears in the film. And the film is very long. I agree with you. I think that final duel scene is a pretty incredible scene, actually. It has this thing that we talked about with Dr. Strangelove, which is this rhythmic to and fro. There's so many pivots in this one scene that it's in his favour, it's in his favour, it's in his favour, now it's in his favour again. It goes backwards and forwards. And there's so many lovely little details in that scene that when the referee, I'm sure that's not what you call the person who oversees the duel, but he kind of says, are you prepared to take your shot? And all the seconds, they just take like half a step back because they know that these guns are so terrible that actually any of them could also get shot. And the way that kind of the palpable fear, the puking up. It's such a brilliantly written scene. Not a great deal happens, but enough happens for you to maximize the drama. I think that's terrific. I do think... I don't know what I wrote in my notes. This is an incredibly beautiful film. I think Kubrick made a career of beautiful images, but I think Barry Lyndon wins the prize. I think there is not one single workmanlike shot in the whole movie. Every single image, every camera setup is like a painting. And more than that, every image is like a specific painting. It's constantly quoting from Gainsborough or Rembrandt or Vermeer or Joshua Reynolds or Constable or Stubbs. It's very, very painterly. These kind of these massed armies or these sort of candlelit interiors. The natural light, the costumes. Every image is stunning, and the film kind of knows it, because the film is sort of about looking. A lot of the theme, the story of the film is about the importance of appearances.
Yeah.
About the kudos that comes from having the money to buy things that are to be looked at, whether they are paintings or clothes or houses or wives. It is all about the money that buys appearances. I wrote in my notes, is this the most beautiful film ever made? I think it might be,
wow.
I think
High
it's
praise.
just amazing.
Yeah.
How incredibly beautiful it is. No wonder it took 300 days to shoot. Maybe there are only 300 setups in the whole film. I mean, but every one of them is so meticulously, beautifully composed. I think it's just fantastic.
I agree with you. It is. It reminded me of a quote that I'm going to try and remember, but I will not really do it very accurately. It's a Robert Altman quote, I think, where he talked about filmmaking as being like filming oil paintings of horses where the horses are always moving. And I think for this film, I felt like I was watching oil paintings and I wanted them to move a little bit more. And I think Altman really, it's a great way of saying it. Like you want beautiful images, but there has to be, it's difficult to capture them because there's supposed to be movement and characters are doing things. But when you do capture them like that, it makes for great filmmaking. And I think I agree with you. Totally beautiful, beautifully blocked and well set up. But very often there wasn't a lot happening, I think. And that's the novel part, I think, coming through.
Right. Yep.
For me. Yep. And but yeah, I thought it was beautiful. I agree with you. There's that last image, which it ends on Lady Lyndon for some reason, and she's sort of just left alone in this room with this great chamber with a couple men. She's working on finances or something like that, and it seemed to have ended on a strange place. And the climactic duel that we've talked about is actually not the last thing in the film. And I felt like something. And then there's this narrator who's giving you lots and lots of information, telling you the story, because there's probably so much book to get into the film. And he tells us what happens to Barry at the very end. We don't see it, but he goes off. He goes back to Ireland, I believe. He's then he's sort of home for a while, and that's the thing I was talking about. It never comes back to Nora and Quinn, which is where all the problems started. It seems like if he goes back to Ireland, he wants to shoot Quinn, I would think, right? I mean, he shoots him in a duel. He thinks he's killed him. He's ruined his life because he's running away from a crime that he hasn't committed. I would think that he would want to go back to the guy who stole his cousin and do a proper duel with him. So it was just, I wasn't satisfied. I didn't get satisfaction.
But see, I would argue, I think Barry's grown up by the end of the film, hasn't he? Because I mean, he deliberately chooses not to shoot his stepson.
Yeah.
He is the bigger man, doesn't shoot.
Yeah.
And then the stepson is the smaller man and does maim him.
Yes.
Whereas Barry is kind of he has learned something, hasn't he? He's developed as a character. This is one thing I wrote down, which is that there is a narrator in this film, and it is one of my kind of bugbears. Yeah. Generally, I don't like narrators in the film, and even though it's narrated by Michael Hordern, again, who's a real kind of favourite classic British actor, and it is a wonderful narration. I was asking myself, would the film work as well without it? Maybe it wouldn't. There are long passages in the film where there aren't any words, but the film it has this narration, but it doesn't make the mistake that Napoleon does, where it's narrating the stuff that we can see. Yeah. So Michael Hordern is not telling us, Barry looked around the room, then he walks towards the door. Because we can see him looking around the room and walking to the door, and they don't bother telling us that sort of stuff because we don't need to hear it. I think that the narration sort of wins me over right from the very first scene, because it does at least begin with a great joke, doesn't it? The very first shot of the film starts with this joke where the narrator is telling you about Barry's father. Yep. And you can see two men having a duel in the very distance in this beautiful kind of wide shot that opens the film.
Great opening.
Exactly. And the narrator kind of tells you, Barry's father would have been this, would have been that. And then Barry's father gets shot. And he says, if he hadn't been killed in a duel over the price of some horses. It's just this great gag. The film opens with this gag, which is, it's a confident way of setting the tone, and explaining kind of what your film is going to be like and how it's going to work.
Yeah, the narration is done quite skillfully in the sense that it's usually done when Barry's traveling from one escapade to another. Like he's very often on a horse or in a carriage or walking or something like that. That's when you're getting the information. So it's almost like it's fixing us up with little bits that we're going to miss because we're not going to see it, which is the exact opposite of Napoleon. And it comes when he's in motion.
Yeah.
I think that's well done. That's a good decision. I think that's a good way to do narration if you're going to do it.
And although I'm kind of disappointed to see any film with a narrator in, I'm delighted to see a film where the story revolves around its characters making choices.
Yeah,
it's like it's very explicitly. We watch these characters choose their fate. Barry, he has the chance to turn down the duel with Quinn, doesn't he? His second says, you could stop now, and there'd be no shame in it. I'll give you some money to go to town, and we'll forget the whole thing. But he chooses not to. He chooses his fate. He chooses to steal the messenger's horse and desert from the army, doesn't he? He chooses to become the Chevalier's accomplice rather than the spy that she's been asked to do.
Yeah.
He chooses to seduce Lady Lyndon.
Yeah.
He chooses to beat his stepson in front of all of his peers. And then, at the end of the movie, he chooses to sort of surrender the duel. He fires at the ground instead of firing at his stepson. In every step of the film, he is responsible for his fate. We see him choosing his fate. He's not like a cork bobbing in a historical sea, being washed this way and that. He's choosing, and that makes the story satisfying, I think. We're seeing a person make decisions and live with the consequences. That's a proper story.
I agree. I wonder about Ryan O'Neal, though. I was wondering, interesting choice again. I think that's one thing these two films have in common is just a wonder about the choice of actor. And again, it's hot. This is probably right around the time of Paper Moon and some of Ryan O'Neal's big films. And so but I don't know if he has much of an Irish accent, and it sort of wanders a little bit throughout the film. And casting is such an important thing. And in both of these films, I think you probably have the wrong lead just because you need someone who's going to sell box office tickets. And
apparently, at the time, Ryan O'Neal was the second biggest film star in the world.
Yeah.
In 1975. Would you like to guess who the world's biggest film star in 1975 was?
It has to be either Robert Redford.
Oh, no.
Or Paul Newman?
No, it was Clint Eastwood.
Oh.
It was the world's top film star in 1975. Third was Burt Reynolds, apparently. Wow. So Ryan O'Neal was sandwiched between those two. So he was the second biggest star in the world at the time.
Wow.
The film cost $11 million, which is an astronomical amount at the time. A lot of money. And, they shot for 300 days. You could see how they spent it all. And they did buy a lot of tricorn hats.
Yeah.
So, all that money is on the screen, largely in the form of hats.
Well, I don't know if I should say this now. I had one of those hats.
Oh, really?
Yeah, well, when you think about it, see, 1976 was the bicentennial in this country, so they were selling those hats everywhere. So I had a cheap, like low-grade felt tricorn hat. Lasted a few months maybe before it just kind of ripped apart. But I did have that hat, and I loved it. So they were, I think, on the American side of things, they were hot because that was we were celebrating a bicentennial. So the tricorn hat made a comeback at that time. And maybe the film, picked up on that or actually inspired some of that.
Yes. Cinema is tied in with the fabric of history.
I was going to ask you a little bit about the Quinn character who you said was played by
Leonard Rossiter.
Leonard Rossiter, yeah. Was he mostly a comic actor? Because in this film, he feels uncomfortable to me somehow. It wasn't like a great acting performance to me. Is he more of a comic actor?
Absolutely. He was a comic actor. He was in two massive sitcoms in the UK, one called Rising Damp, where he was what's the word? He was a landlord who was a real kind of skinflint.
Okay.
And a bit of a creep. And the other was The Life and Death of Reginald Perrin, which is a kind of, like a really strange BBC sitcom about a man who, right at the very beginning of the first episode, he fakes his own death and takes off his clothes and leaves them at the side of the ocean.
Oh.
And, pretends to have committed suicide and then kind of reinvents himself.
Yeah.
I remember it being on television when I was a child of mine, not understanding the life and death of Reginald Perrin at all, but it was a massive hit, and it's still a cultural touchstone in the UK, even now, 40 years on. So, but he's exclusively known as a comedian, and it's strange to see him turning up in this or 2001.
Yeah.
Because I think he plays like a Russian a Russian astronaut or a Russian kind of diplomat in 2001.
Yeah.
And it's strange to see him turn up like that.
Yeah.
Where's the gags?
Yeah, I didn't. Yeah, I felt like he'd just been pulled off the set because someone got sick, so he played the Quinn part. It didn't feel natural to him, and I think Kubrick's framing and use of close-ups didn't help him a whole lot. He was holding a lot of close-ups in a way that Sergio Leone we saw in Once Upon a Time in the West. It worked really well for, especially Bronson's face, but also Henry Fonda's face as well. But it doesn't, those films are kind of close in era as well, and it doesn't work as well in Barry Lyndon with Ryan O'Neill's face and Quinn's face. It was odd to me.
Yeah, they are not as interesting faces, I guess, are they?
And it seemed that they were held for a long time without the actors, I think, being comfortable in the character or in that age or just in those moments. So, and it's funny just to look at that and think, oh, that's weird acting. It's just, they're staring at the camera. It's not when they're delivering lines or anything like that. It's just that presence of the face. And maybe I'm spoiled because we just watched Bronson's pocked face for 3 hours and just doing wonderful things with the script. Or Henry Fonda also just out of character and just unshaven and just looking so ominous. So it struck me as being an off role for him, I guess, somehow.
Yeah, his British faces can't match Charles Bronson. You're right.
Whose face can match Bronson? Jeez.
Okay, well, we've looked at a lot of faces this week.
Yeah.
Which face are you going to choose to portray yourself? Oh, let's play. Who am I?
Who am I?
I just went on and on about it, but I'm going to be Quinn, I think. I just feel like I would be the person who would cheat at a duel to try and not be killed. But it's not. If you look at
Probably the most sensible person in the whole film, actually.
I would be uncomfortable with close-ups, and I would cheat in a duel on film. So it's odd though, because in the story it sounds like he didn't know that he was going to be shot with. I think they said toe again. He wasn't going to be shot with a bullet. That it was just going to be an act, and that he actually did feel some injury in taking the fake bullet. But I think that's me right there. Just, probably not good with a gun and falling to the earth in a bad bit of acting.
And still marrying the hot cousin.
Nora. See, I think he should have gone, Barry Lyndon should have gone back for the cousin. I'm still talking about that. Who are you? No doctors.
Yeah. Thankfully, there are some doctors in these films. So I must say, I did genuinely identify with the surgeon at the end of Barry Lyndon. So after the duel, Barry is kind of lying like, on a bed in a room above a pub somewhere.
Yeah, oh,
and the doctor turns up and says, well, I'm sorry, Barry, I'm going to have to amputate. And Barry Lyndon says, you're going to what? What? And I think, well, I've kind of had that conversation in real life.
Oh, really? Oh.
Happily, I've never had to amputate any bits of anybody, but I have had to have proper conversations with real people explaining we're going to have to do this. Oh, wow. I'm really sorry. This is probably not what you were looking forward to, but it's this or something even worse. I did sympathise with the guy having to break bad news. Yeah. Absolutely.
Okay. And
there is a doctor in Napoleon as well. I had to look him up because I thought I recognised him, and I was right. The doctor who is looking after Josephine, who kind of says, "Oh, you have congestion on the chest and an inflamed throat," is played by Kevin Eldon, who is a pretty famous UK comedian again. It's another comedy role. Huh. It's a guy trying to play serious, but all I can see is, he's kind of a UK comedian. Make of that what you will. But I didn't think he quite pulled it off. Whereas Barry Lyndon's surgeon, that was the real deal.
I've said it before, I'll say it again. The best anesthesiologists or anesthetists are the best comedians. I mean, that's just fact. Fact. I was going to ask you though, have you ever witnessed an amputation?
Oh yes, yeah. No, I've anesthetized for an amputation many times. Yeah, absolutely.
So in that scene, this has always horrified me. This is one reason I never wanted to live in, the age of enlightenment and revolution. Is that there's no anesthesia, right? I mean, they're just, what are they doing, getting you drunk and then taking a saw to your leg or something then?
Absolutely. The good surgeon was a fast surgeon back then, exactly.
Oh, really? Okay.
You get a bit of leather to bite on, 2 friends to hold you down, and the operation will be over in 20 seconds. Oh, absolutely. Oh, God. So your friend is a fast surgeon.
We'll compare that to why I did want to live in the age of enlightenment and revolution after that. But, That was rough. Yeah, I whenever I see the old amputations in film, I just think, oh God, how horrible! How lucky I am that my leg's been operated on and my foot's been operated on heavily under the influence of anesthesia. And thanks to you,
there's never been a better time to be alive than 2023. Yep, you're exactly right.
Yeah, I don't know. I'm going to counter that in a moment, but. Yeah.
I assume the reason that you wish you'd have been alive in the 18th century is because of the clothes. Am I right?
That's sort of part of it. Yeah, I love watching the fashion and the accuracy of the fashion in both of these films. Yeah. Although I think it's always bizarre that the men would wear so much makeup and then put on those fake birthmarks and then wear the wigs and stuff and just so much talcum. Oh, I mean, I like a little talcum, but that's
it must have been properly fun dressing up to go out back then. You put it on a real show.
Absolutely. No, that is definitely one reason. This sort of takes us into a synthesis, I think, to a certain extent. Should we start synthesizing?
Shall I play the song?
Are you ready for that?
I'll play the jingle and we'll see if we can draw the two films together.
Yeah. Okay. I speak slowly.
Right, you have comments prepared. You start.
No, I just have a couple of little things to say. Is that I appreciate both of these films because I was infatuated with this whole era. I don't know exactly when Barry Lyndon's supposed to take place, but it's around that time. And then I actually studied, spent a good part of my undergraduate degree studying the 1800s and the 1700s and that century. And because of I thought the music was fantastic. After watching Napoleon, the thing I wanted to do was go listen to the Emperor Concerto by Beethoven because it's just such a great piece of music and it's written for Napoleon and the 1812 Overture. I went back and listened to that too. I just love the music of that time. I love the revolutions that are happening. Some of them going foul, some of them going a little bit better. I love the philosophers of that time. So I've always been infatuated with that time. But in the last 5 or 6 years, I've also just realized it's just colonization and wealthy people and aristocracy. And I hated it for a few years. But one thing Ridley Scott helped me was he helped to reconcile me to that age because I realized that the thing I love about that age, when I see it on film, is just the slower pace of life. I love the hats. Don't get me wrong. Just less technology and less spoiled natural world. And I think both of these films actually capture that. And I just found myself craving this time before a cell phone and this time before just being in communication with people all the time and really having to cross distances to get into fights with other countries. Now you can do it over the internet, basically, and it just made me fall in love with that whole age all over again. So that was, and both films do it really well. So I just enjoyed that. I enjoyed being taken back in time in a way that I haven't really been enjoying in films lately. So that was the one thing to open. But I also I think there's a difference between historical fiction and like making fiction of history somehow.
Making stuff up.
Yeah, okay, there you go. Yeah, fake news. I just felt like with Napoleon, I think you should actually be maybe obligated by law to put out a fact-checking short documentary about your major film release so that you can maybe it's embedded in the extras on a DVD, but they don't really do that anymore either. But I mean, I think a short documentary about what his life was really like would be helpful to me. Because there's a lot of speculation in that film. And, I think I'm assuming Thackeray's novel is mostly fiction. It might be based on something loosely, but we would think of that as a work of fiction. And I think you can't go wrong because no one's going to call you out on facts on that. So I wonder about Napoleon in terms of how accurate their love story was and these letters are and, or how liberally they just sort of rewrite it to be a Hollywood film. So that's something that came to me out of both of these films, and they're very different approaches. I think it's different to adapt fiction, and I'm not going to say that Kubrick did it well, but I think he's got the easier task because you're not rooted in history in the same way, and I don't think you should show the pyramids getting blown up if Napoleon didn't do that. So call me a stickler for detail, but those are a couple of my initial takes. How about yourself?
I mean, it's fairly easy to draw these films together insofar as. Kubrick planned to make Napoleon and wasn't able to. Yeah. And so, like, making the film of Napoleon, to me, it's a bit like The Golden Fleece, for top-level filmmakers. It's like this prize hanging on a tree branch just out of your reach, isn't it? Could you make the film that Kubrick couldn't? Will you take your place next to the great man? It's like it's just this flag waved at kind of prestige directors. Also, Ridley Scott has had his shot at the project that Kubrick could not do. Yep. And I do feel like if he's missed his shot, but he took it. Yeah, he took it. And I don't think you can make a Napoleon film without people acknowledging, you're trying to wear Kubrick's shoes, are you? And Napoleon to me really feels like a sort of cosplay Barry Lyndon, because I made a terrible mistake because I watched Barry Lyndon and then the next day went to watch Napoleon, and I really loved Barry Lyndon. And my advice to anyone listening to this podcast is, don't go and see anything after you've seen Barry Lyndon, because it's going to pale a bit. It's not going to look as great. The lighting, the costumes, the framing, the candles, the card games, the battles. Everything from Napoleon draws from Barry Lyndon. Yeah. So it's once you've seen Barry Lyndon, it's impossible to see Napoleon except through that lens. Yeah. But I think there's this big difference. I think Barry Lyndon, has this central theme, which I think is that ambition contains the seeds of its own failure, and I think Barry Lyndon does successfully address this theme and and examine it appropriately. But I don't think Napoleon quite has the heart or the smarts to do the same thing. I think what I wrote in my notes here is that Barry Lyndon shows us how ambition leads to ruin, whereas Napoleon shows us ambition and then it shows us ruin. Yeah. But it doesn't necessarily connect the two, and that I think is why these two films are, they are in the same wheelhouse. Do I get extra points for mentioning that word? But they are not the same. Yeah. And I think Napoleon wants to be Barry Lyndon and is not. Yeah, and it's drab. Napoleon's a drab-looking film. It does not have the color and the liveliness of Barry Lyndon. I agree with that. And I saw it in the exact opposite order. I did see Napoleon first. I saw it under ideal conditions, which you did not. So as I said, it doesn't suck, but I really wonder about a lot of the liberties taken bringing it to screen. And you're taking liberties with famous historical figures. And it's fiction, isn't it? I mean, we might think that there's some truth in it. And there are obviously the big moments of Moscow and Waterloo and all that are real, but you're really taking liberties with this personal story that is supposed to be the angle for the film about his relationship with Josephine. And I think kind of knowing not a whole lot about what that was really like and just guessing and maybe making the wrong guess. Like, I don't know that that's the more compelling story. And certainly when you're going back from the two storylines back and forth, it doesn't really create a lot of momentum. It's a shorter film, but it felt just as long as Barry Lyndon, to be honest with you. And I think you're right. It's that midpoint scene, the Battle of Austerlitz, is just that was kind of the excuse, I think, to make the film. That sells the film. If you need to get this film produced, you can say, wow, there's going to be this crazy scene where they lure them onto a lake and then bomb the lake and everyone dies, which I had a hard time believing that an army would be that stupid. Did that really happen? You would know if you're on a lake, I think. Every time I've been on a frozen lake, I've been well aware of the fact that I was on a frozen lake. So it was very hard for me to believe that. And I think that really just takes the legs out of the whole table, and it becomes a very hard film to believe. As I said, it's kind of critic-proof. I didn't hate it. But it's not I don't think it's as good a film as Barry Lyndon, but as I said before, I have some misgivings about that. But I think that's mostly just from trying to take a novel and turning it into a film. I just think that's a big mistake to begin with. But it's just definitely much more skillfully done. And I was just reminded just how versatile, as I said before, Kubrick really is. Has a lot of range. He's just surprisingly, he's not surprisingly prolific with the number of films, but definitely being able to pull off so many different films in so many different genres and do it well, that's quite an accomplishment. And I don't know that you asked at the very beginning about me as a Ridley Scott man, and I don't think Ridley Scott's done that. So I don't think he's bettered Kubrick at all by making Napoleon. But it's good to have ambitions, isn't it? Barry Lyndon is 48 years old this year.
Yeah.
I'm not sure how confident I am that people will still be watching or talking about
Yeah.
Ridley Scott's Napoleon in 48 years. But 48 years is a long time.
Yeah.
To make any kind of art that survives 48 years is a remarkable achievement,
Yeah.
and there's no shame in reaching and not and failing.
Yeah, precisely. Yeah.
Well, we've got just enough time to talk about what else has been playing at this theatre. I'm going to volunteer to go first this time because I have seen one other film this week which fits very closely in with the themes of the 18th century dramas that we've been watching this week. We watched Men in Black, the 1997 science fiction comedy. It's directed by Barry Sonnenfeld, who'd done Addams Family and Get Shorty. Written by Ed Solomon. I had to look it up. He wrote all of the Bill and Ted films. I take my hat off to him for that. He also wrote the first Charlie's Angels film, which is one of my guilty pleasures. But he did write the Super Mario Brothers film, which I've never seen, but I've heard from so many corners is absolutely astonishingly dreadful. He wrote Now You See Me, which is the kind of the magicians do a heist film, which is just dreadful. So it's been an up and down career for Ed Solomon. Men in Black, it was like the first film I think that succeeded in making a kind of big budget CGI sci-fi comedy hit.
Yeah.
Much copied afterwards, I think. Still entertaining. Will Smith is still enjoyable to watch. And I tell you what, Men in Black, it's very brisk. It's just over an hour and a half. It just rattles through. So much so that it feels a little bit underdeveloped. They leap from plot point to plot point so very quickly. Yeah. But it's never boring. Yeah, still enjoyable. Still made us all chuckle. Yeah, my son was laughing like a drain at some scenes.
Well
so
done.
still enjoyable, Men in Black.
So good. Good choice. I love that film. Yeah. And when you said remind me, what's the first Charlie's Angels? Is that Drew Barrymore with
That's right. Yeah.
Lucy Liu
and Cameron Diaz.
I love that one too. That's a good film. Yeah. Huh.
Although I haven't seen that film for 20 years. I wonder whether watching it again now, if it's still good. I hope it is.
Yeah. Probably. No, I hope it is. I thought it was good. That's the right length too.
Yeah.
Hour and a half, a little bit more is good. I watched a film of similar length because the last film, and the only film I've seen, other than the two we featured this week, was on a bus. And it's a 2-hour bus ride from Boston to Portland. So they always put on just a film that's an hour and 45 minutes or so, makes the ride go by. But it's often not a particularly good film. So I watched What About Bob, which I had never seen before. That features Bill Murray and Richard Dreyfuss as a psychologist and patient, or psychiatrist, probably, and patient. I think in reverse order, perhaps. Dreyfuss is a famous psychiatrist, and Bill Murray is agoraphobic or something like that. Frank Oz, I think, whose work I've always thought he comes out of the Muppet culture. I think he's an Englishman, I believe. Is that right?
Oh, I would need to look it up, I'm afraid.
Yeah, I think so. Yeah,
I feel like with a name like Frank Oz, well, obviously he must be Australian, surely. But
no, I don't know.
But I don't think that's how surnames work, is it?
I'll look it up. But it very broad humor. I think most of his work is broad humor. He comes out of the Jim Henson studio and the Muppet background, and his films have always struck me as being kind of childish, but I think it's because he makes them for the families, and it's kind of a children or a family film. Yeah, I'd never seen it before. It's about that same era, 1991, so it might be 6 or 7 years before Men in Black, but I definitely saw it. It seemed like it was on a videotape too. I don't know what that bus is.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. So it brought back some memories. You got a younger Bill Murray, already going bald, but having a terrible haircut. You've got to just start shaving the hair entirely, I think. Yeah, so it's just them hamming it up and, those kinds of gags.
Am I not right? Don't you have psychiatrists or psychologists in the family?
My father was a psychiatrist, yeah.
So did this bring back warm childhood memories?
No, because it's very unrealistic, delightful and funny in some ways, but no, not reality, not by any means. I don't know. It's interesting. I think psychiatrists and anesthetists are the comedians in the medical world, so it should be funny, yeah. And I think, again, I think the tone, it's definitely for a family funny. It's not for my kind of film, but it was great to have that on the, I was exhausted. You got to get on that bus, and I just want to have an hour and a half to relax, and it fit the mood. Yeah.
That's ideal, isn't it? Yeah, 2 hours just fly by.
Yeah.
Absolutely. And if the film's not good, you can look out the window.
That's
it's like
right.
Perfect solution.
Okay,
let's do the socials before we sign off.
Yes, the socials. We are still social because we are on the Instagram at Two Wheel Cinema Club. You can read James's beautiful writing on the blog at Two Wheel Cinema Club or twowheelcinemaclub.com. Don't forget our good friends Concubots at concubot.com. Comment on the YouTube channel or email us at tworeelcinemaclub@gmail.com. Let us know what you think. Correct our mistakes. Oh boy, I had written down a couple that I wanted to correct, but too bad I can't correct them. Offer us some sponsorship. You've heard from the Concubots. Did I mention the concubots.com?
They're getting full maximum value out of their sponsorship this week, aren't they?
Yeah, and please tell your friends. Word of mouth is great. Leave us a review if you can. It helps us out. And I had a chance to talk to some Two Reel Cinema Club members over the holidays here, and it was lovely. So please reach out and please tell your friends.
Next time, disappointingly, not Maestro this week, not West Side Story. That's next week. That's going to be after Christmas. We are watching The Holdovers next week, and comparing it to UK 1980s film Another Country. So let's see how those two line up. Until then, thanks for listening, and we'll see you next time.
Goodbye, everyone.
And I think you should dig out that tricorn hand.
Yes, well, maybe we'll talk about that at a popcorn counter or something.
Now you're talking.